Hi there, everyone. We are here at the Alabama Nature Center. We're out back behind the pavilion today, and it's a beautiful day, and we're in this big, nice opening right behind the pavilion. Hopefully you recognize it. And we're here today to talk about the night flyers. So we're talking about bats and moths today. So I have a lot of things to show you today and a lot of things to talk about. And feel free to and comment and all of that as we go along today. So lots of things to show you, and we're going to be talking about these things because, well, guess what? Halloween's coming up, and this is what people think of when they think of Halloween. Bats like this. So how many of you have something like this hanging up around your house, or you've seen it already? And so this is what we think of when we think of bats, typically. So hopefully we'll be teaching you some cool things today about bats, and we want to talk about moths too. We've been talking about butterflies and bees. Moths are often forgotten about, and so they tend to go along nicely with talking about bats, so we're going to talk about them together. So let's get started. So there are actually more than 11,000 species of moths in the US alone. So I like to show you some books in case you're more interested in the subject. So this is a Peterson Field Guide to Moths. Look at all those bright, beautiful moths. Not what you expect when you think about moths, right? So there are quite the variety of moths, and they range widely in their colors and their shapes and their patterns and their sizes too. And so a lot of people think that moths always have to be drab, and a lot of people try to understand the differences between butterflies and moths. Well, there are differences, but there's a lot of exceptions to the rules. For instance, most moths fly at night, but definitely not all moths. A lot of moths are kind of drab colored, but definitely not all moths. And so I can show you an example. This is a Madagascar sunset moth. Very beautiful, brightly colored moth that flies during the day. But we can talk about some generalizations that we can make about moths. So moths typically have these kind of stubby bodies that are very, very furry, fluffy. Of course, it's not with hair, it's actually with scales. We can look at a butterfly body, and we can see that butterfly bodies tend to be kind of slim and not have as many scales on there, versus looking at a moth's body, we can see that they tend to be a little bit broader and they have more scales. We can also make some observations about their antennae. So if you look at a butterfly, look at this antenna right here. So it tends to be very slim, and it has clubbed ends. So the very ends of their antennae are kind of got little clubs on the end. While with moths, a lot of times you're looking at super thick, fuzzy antennae. So let's look over here at this Luna moth. We can see that it's really fluffy. Moths and butterflies also differ in how they hold their wings when they land. So if you think about a butterfly, it lands typically with its wings straight up in the air, closed together. Well, moths generally, but not always, have their wings flattened out just like this when they land. So that can help you out with identifying them as well. So moths are also known to be great mimics. So they can mimic all different kinds of things, including things like bird poop and moths, and even hummingbirds, like this little hummingbird moth, that when it's flying around, it can kind of fool you for a second and thinking that it's a hummingbird. They range in size from smaller than a pencil tip to bigger than a songbird, which is incredible. And they're also excellent pollinators. They tend to like flowers that are fragrant and white. It makes it easier for them to see in the dark. And these little antennae are used for finding other moths of their kind. So they have a great sense of smell without having noses. They have these antennae instead. Let's see if I can get this to focus. So a male moth can smell a female more than 7 miles away. That's pretty cool. And they're using their antennae to do that. So moths and butterflies can also differ in their life cycle. So they all go through complete metamorphosis. So they all start out as an egg. And then they all form caterpillars. So they're all called caterpillars. But when they get to their pupa phase, something is a little different about them. So when you think about a butterfly actually, when it becomes a pupa, it forms a chrysalis. And so a chrysalis is when its skin becomes hard and smooth and its insides kind of go all liquidy as it's going through the process of becoming a butterfly. And then eventually it'll break out of that chrysalis and it will be a full-grown adult butterfly. Well, with a moth, they go through their pupa phase a little differently and they form a cocoon. And a cocoon means that they have some sort of protective barrier around them, and it can be anything from the silk that they excrete themselves, or it can be leaves, or sometimes other materials that they've found. This one has some silk on it, but this is made out of leaves. And then when they're ready to come out of their cocoon, they actually have an acidic-like spit that they use to break out of their cocoon. And then they're a grown adult moth. A lot of moths, when they're adults, don't eat. So the Luna moth, like this, when it becomes an adult, so when you see it in this form, it does not have a mouth, and nor does it have a digestive system. So when it's a full grown adult like this, it's not going to eat anything. So its only purpose at that point is to find a mate, to lay eggs, and then they die. So Luna moths as adults typically only live about a week. And so it's very important that they have these really cool antennae to go find a mate and be able to reproduce before they die. Luna moths they're called Luna moths because of these markings, these eye spots that look like little moons. So that's where they get their name. So if you see a Luna moth on the ground, it might be towards the end of its lifespan. Females also can't fly very well, but males are great flyers. So typically males are the ones searching out the females. So I have a few different moths for you. So we just talked about the Luna moth. Luna moths, their caterpillars like to eat hickory leaves, sweet gum, different tree leaves like that. That's what they eat as caterpillars. We also have over here, we have this is a tulip tree silk moth. It likes tulip poplars. And then we have, let's see, we've got a peppered moth. We've got a sphinx moth. This is another kind of sphinx moth this is called an owlet moth. We have an Io moth. So we talked about the eye spots on the Luna moth, but an Io moth it looks like eyes. And so in the animal world, if you're looking at the eyes of another animal, you can judge its size. So if you think about some predator looking at this moth and it thinks those spots are its eyes, then it thinks that its body should be in proportion with those eyes, making it think that this is a much larger animal than it actually is. So that's the purpose of eye spots on butterflies and moths. We also have, this is a little bald cypress moth, so it likes bald cypress trees. Pretty cool. Lots of cool specialists. There's all kinds of little books and guides that you can get if you want to learn more about moths in your area. They are really cool to learn about and pretty appreciated. So moths actually outnumber butterflies in their number of species. And, you know, they are still important pollinators as well. And I've got, this is a really cool moth species here. This is a moth that has, it's specially adapted to pollinate this mysterious ghost orchid. So the ghost orchid grows on the tree. It has, the nectar is at the bottom of this long tube right here. And so the moth is specialized. It's adapted to have this really long tongue to get the nectar, and that's how it properly pollinates this orchid. There's also some pretty specialized moths for yucca. So different kinds of yucca plants have their own moth partner that helps pollinate each individual yucca species. They're specially adapted for that yucca species. So that's pretty cool. All right, so we're talking about bats and moths. So bats sometimes like to eat moths, which is kind of why it works out well to talk about them both together. But I have a question for you. If we're looking at this, predator versus prey. So we have two different competitors here. We have the little brown bat. Little brown bat has a lot of cool special adaptations. It can use echolocation. It can produce nearly 4,500 squeaks each second, which hits nearby objects and bounces back to the bat's ears, which paints a picture in the bat's brain of its surrounding. And bats can actually identify something as small as a strand of hair using their echolocation skills. They have their built-in bug nets, which is their wonderful wings. They have wing and tail membranes they attach to their little toes, and we'll talk about that in a second, to scoop up prey items and put them in their mouth. And in this scenario, we actually have a tiger moth. Some tiger moths taste horrible. When these moths hear a bat, they vibrate organs called tymbals. These tymbals make clicks to warn the bat, "Don't eat me, I taste yucky." Some taste really yummy, and so tiger moths can imitate the tymbal clicks of a moth that taste yucky. And they can also use clicks to make the bat squeak sound fuzzy and garbled when it's going back to the bat's ears. So they basically jam the bat's sonar ability. So in this scenario, we have a moth and we have a bat. Which one do you think wins? All right, we'll come back to that. I'll let you ponder that for a second. Which one do you think wins? All right, so if we're talking about bats, I have lots of pictures of bats to show you today. They're a really diverse group of mammals. They're the second largest group of mammals in the world. And when we're talking about these, I've got a couple of books to show you too. Bats in the United States. And this book is a wonderful book. It has beautiful pictures to show you. I highly recommend this book. It's very interesting and it has cool pictures. And of course, we can also look at our, I think I've shown you this before, I've shown others in this series, Mammals of Alabama, because bats are mammals. And so they have fur, they are warm-blooded, they have a backbone, they give birth to live young, and they nurse their young. So these are some bats of Alabama. And it shows their range in the state and the United States and tells you about them. So, another great book. So, second largest group of mammals in the world. And we have a lot of different bat species here in Alabama. We have a lot of protected bat species as well, because a lot of them are in decline. The bat species that you can find here are insectivores. So they eat mostly insects. They can eat mosquitoes, moths, things like that. In fact, they eat so many insects that they are contributed for $3.7 billion worth of pest control each year in the United States. So that's a pretty handy thing. There are bats in the Southwest that are long-nosed and have long tongues that are pollinators, and they pollinate mostly agave, blue agave plants. There are some bats in the world that are fruit-eating bats. So I've got a nice skull. This is of a fruit bat, and it likes to eat lots and lots of fruit. And that contributes to seed dispersal. So reasons why these are good to have around. Either they're pollinators, they're insectivores, or fruit-eating bats. We also have, here's a picture of a fruit-eating bat. We don't have any of those here, but they're worth looking at. And there are some fish-eating bats that swoop down and can catch fish. And I think this is another fish-eating bat right here. And look at those wings. So let's look for a second. Let's look for a second at a bat skeleton right here. So a bat skeleton has just the same, pretty much the same bones that we have. And they're just shaped a little differently. So you can see its little rib cage there, its skull. It has a backbone vertebrae. It has legs, and it has arms, and it has these super long fingers, and it's the patagium, which is the membrane that stretches in between those super long fingers that make up their wings. And this can also attach to their back legs and sometimes their tail. So I have a little stuffed animal bat friend here that can demonstrate to you how it has these little fingers and how the membrane is attached. And it's attached to their back leg, and it can be attached to their tail. And then I have another stuffed animal friend that shows a free-tailed bat, which is where it's attached to their back legs, but not their tail. So they have a little tail that's free. So there's lots of different kinds of bats. And we have some pictures of the world's smallest bat, which is also the world's smallest mammal, the bumblebee bat. And the bumblebee bat, its body is the size of your thumb. So imagine that for a second. Its wingspan is about 5 inches, and it weighs the equivalent of 2 Skittles. That's crazy. And then we also have the largest bat, which is the giant golden-crowned flying fox, which has a wingspan of 6 feet. So imagine that for a second. 6 feet from here to here. It's a fruit-eating bat. There are so many different kinds of cool bat species. Some have really big ears. Some have cool noses. This is another big-eared bat. Some fruit-eating bats. And of course, the ones that have these big ears are using their super cool echolocation skills. So they're making sounds, they're making little clicks, and the sonic sounds go through the air and a vibration through the air, and it bounces off of another object. And the bat's super cool ears. Here's that frog-eating bat. I was looking for that earlier. Frog-eating bat. So that sound bounces back. The bat can hear it with its super cool ears, and it paints a picture in the bat's mind of where the object is, the shape of it, how far away it is, and everything like that. That's really cool. All right, so bats here in Alabama. This is one of our bats. This is the little brown bat. Here's a picture of what it looks like. Its wingspan is about 8 to 11 inches, so this piece of paper is 11 inches. So that's about how long it would be. Probably about how long my little fake bat here is. And then I have a teeny tiny little brown bat skull. So you can see just how tiny its skull would be. All right. So there are some problems facing our bat friends. So we can talk about how good they are. They're awesome to have around because they're eating lots and lots of insects. The ones we have here are insectivores, eating lots of insects. So that's very helpful. But a lot of our bats are in trouble. And so we can talk about, think about why are some reasons why they're in trouble. Some of that's, of course, habitat loss can be related. You can always contribute habitat loss. If you think about bugs that they're wanting to eat, so if we're looking around, what are bats going to eat around here? Well, they're going to eat moths, they're going to eat mosquitoes, they're going to eat things like that. Well, if you're spraying mosquito, like if the mosquito truck comes through and it sprays and kills all the insects in that area, well, you have two problems. Well, one, maybe nothing for the bat to eat, but also you could have some food that has been contaminated that the bat's going to eat. We can also think about mosquitoes, the mosquito truck, the poisons that they use also can kill butterflies, and it can kill our moth friends, and it can kill our bee friends. But if you do some things to help bats and you have a really nice bat population, well, then they can help with your mosquito problems without having to use poisons and things like that. So, problems facing bats. A lot of people are really scared of bats. And a lot of people don't have historically not wanted them around. And a lot of that is because of the fear of rabies. Well, bats can get rabies just like any other mammal. However, very few bats have rabies. Our number one rabies vector species here in the southeast is the raccoon. But remember, you can only get rabies if a rabid animal bites you or if you come in contact with its saliva. And if a bat bites you, even though this bat's really small, you're still going to know that it bit you, so you can go and get treated. But you can't get rabies just from looking at a bat or if you just barely come in contact with a bat. Some people have thinking bats are going to get caught in your hair. But bats are actually excellent flyers, so they can easily avoid flying through your hair. So white nose syndrome is a problem with bats. So a lot of bats hibernate, and they can go into forests and they can go into trees. But when we think about bats and bats hibernating, we think about them going into caves. And we do have a lot of caves, even here in Alabama. And so if bats are clustered together and they're hibernating, there's a problem with a disease called white nose syndrome. And it's a disease of hibernating bats. It's actually a type of fungus, and it affects bats during the winter. The growth of the fungus on the skin disturbs their hibernation, so that can result in dehydration, starvation, and sometimes death for these bats. We've detected white nose syndrome in 33 U.S. states and 7 Canadian provinces. So this is a problem that's spreading, and it can be contaminated. It can be cross-contaminated, so you can pick it up and you can take it into a cave and you can spread it, which is a big problem. So some things that you can do to to help bats. This is a bat box right here. And so we're talking about mosquito control and helping out bats. You can put up a bat box, and there's plenty of plans that are available online for you to look up and see how to build your own bat box. As you can see, this is a pretty simple one. It does have nice grooves inside, so the grooves are to help them hang on. The opening has to be, this is about 1 inch. So the opening, it can't be too big because you don't want predators to get in there, and they need to be able to go in there and stay warm. And you've got to be able to hang it up and hang it on a tree. And there's certain locations that are better than others. So they need a water source. And it's best if it's pointing in a certain direction. So a south-facing direction is preferable. So we actually have a bat box here on the property. We have a few. And so we're gonna walk over and we're gonna look at one of the bat boxes. By the way, before I head over here, we were talking about our scenario of our predator versus prey scenario, bat versus moth. In this scenario, the moth wins. Because of those cool little tymbals, the tiger moth will win. So it has those adaptations. The sonic battle between bat and bug tymbals give tiger moths the upper hand. So that's our winning scenario. So let's walk over here. Bluebird box. We've had a past episode of talking about bluebird boxes, but over here, it's kind of away from everyone, away from the busyness. Give them a little piece. It gets lots of sun. They have some clearance from the trees around it, so they can fly in and out easily. And this is pretty high up in the air too. This is on a telephone pole. And we have 2 of them. We have one there, one on the other side. It has little grooves for the bats to be able to climb up there. And we can look up in there. Don't see anyone in there right now. Of course, you can kind of check out around the base of wherever you've put your bat box and see if you can find any droppings. Of course, bat guano, and that's something we didn't even talk about, is guano is used for all sorts of reasons, both by humans and other animals. It's actually a pretty important substance found in caves where there's lots of hibernating bats. Fun fact. So, and this is located in our pavilion field. So if you ever wanted to peek up and see if there's any bats hanging around, it's kind of hard to see, but it is here, and you can maybe get some ideas for how to put one of these in your own yard. And of course, if you ever wanted to go bat watching right around sunset, you can oftentimes look up at the sky and see them darting overhead. Especially if you go to a pond or something like that, you can see them swooping down over the water, catching insects. There are some caves and places here in Alabama where you can go and watch bats, our native bats. Lots of bugs out today. Hopefully the bats will have a nice tasty meal. All right, well, thank you for joining us today, learning about bats and moths. Please let us know if you have any questions, if you want to know more about bats or moths, and how you can potentially put up a bat box or something like that. We'd be more than happy to answer some questions. Just leave your questions in the comments here, and we will answer them long after this video has been posted. And please let us know if you want to see anything in particular for our live naturalist chats. If you're enjoying them, we want to hear about it. We want to know that you like watching them. Please share this Let's see. Are bats, oh, I just got a question. Are bats aggressive? No, bats are not aggressive. They can be defensive. So if you try to grab a bat, just like grabbing any other wild animal, they're going to try to defend themselves. But bats are not interested in humans at all. They're interested in catching insects. So I can tell you from my personal experience of walking out here at the Nature Center, where we do have a fairly nice bat population, walking around at sunset and having bats swoop around. I can see them up in the sky and I can see them catching insects, and they've never bothered me. They're not interested in you at all. There's a lot of fears that people have, and just like with a lot of other animals, those fears can be because of movies, television, media. There's lots of sensationalism that goes around with bats. So if you do some reading and try to learn about the bats in your area, you'll see that a lot of those fears are not really based in a lot of things. It's just like, use common sense, and, you don't want to ever approach a wild animal. You don't want to try to grab one. If you see a sick or injured bat or something like that, you can call somebody. You typically want to call somebody who's going to be licensed or is ready to handle a rabies vector species. So any animal that is known for carrying rabies, that includes bats, raccoons, skunks, other animals like that. You need someone who is vaccinated against rabies before they can handle an animal that could potentially carry rabies. And even though bats can carry rabies, as I said before, not many bats have rabies. So just because they can carry it doesn't mean they all have it. And remember, all mammals can carry and transmit rabies, but bats are not more likely, I shouldn't say that, but not in the percentages of testing of bats, they found that less than 1% of bats actually have rabies in this area. So bats are also not where there's colonies of bats. There was no more instances of them transmitting rabies to other animals where there were large colonies. So because in order for them to transmit rabies, they have to bite and use their saliva to contaminate another animal. So if they're just going after insects, there's not much of a chance of them doing that. So hopefully that answers your question. You can learn more about bats by picking up some of the books that are recommended. There's lots of great reputable sources online for you to learn about bats. And feel free to ask us some questions and we will answer them the best we can. So hopefully you tune in next week. We're going to be talking about some more creepy critters that are typically seen around Halloween. And hopefully we can dispel some more myths about these animals. We'll see you next time.